That is a bill that I am carrying, and so I am going to turn the gavel over now to Chairman Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman White, you are recognized on House Bill 0702.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me say this is a bill, I think this is why we have such a large crowd, and that's great. That's great because we got everybody's attention, and that's what we want to do when it comes to education. We're here for one reason, and that in the state of Tennessee, we have been 44th, 46th, and 48th long enough, the 50 states. We're going to make some changes this year. We're going to make some changes next year. And that means that it may make some people uncomfortable, and if we make the wrong decision, we can always back up, but we're going to look at changes, and that's what this bill is about. And committee members, I want you to just kind of clear your head of everything you've heard, and everybody that's on one side or the other of this issue, kind of pull back a little bit and think of what we're trying to do. Remember this: no one group has all the answers. That's why we have a plurality of people here. No one group has all the answers. So what we're trying to do is bring everybody's thoughts together as we move forward. If you have a good thought, we'll listen to it. And so that's what we're trying to do. Let me make a comparison. Some of you may relate to this. Some of you may think, well, what's he talking about? I started my career out in education. Then I went into small business. Small business where we dealt with special event people. And what we did in 1990, when my brother and I started the business, we rented chairs and dishes and linens and things to people who were like getting married or having festivals. Well, when we started the business, there was one or two other businesses in town who were also doing what we were getting into the business of doing, and that was renting chairs. But what we found out, people come to us, they have a wedding, and they say, your competition has good service, but they're sending us dirty chairs because you pick the chairs up at 10 o'clock at night when it's raining. And so what we started doing is, guess what? We started sending out clean chairs, and we got the business. So that's all we're talking about in education, is we're trying to put enough competition into the system to where everybody starts performing. Where pretty soon our competition started renting clean chairs also. So and I think that's the same analogy we can take in education. While we were staying at 46th, 47th, 48th, all these years, well, maybe we need a little competition into the system. So what I'm trying to do with House Bill 702 is this. My goal is to give every child, and I've got some prepared statements, Mr. Chairman, as we get started.
Let me get a motion in a second if we can bring the bill before us. Is there a motion? Second? Here, second. So, Chairman White, you're recognized on the bill.
We do have an amendment which makes this bill.
Okay, I need a motion and a second on the amendment. Motion and a second on the amendment is there. Chairman White, you're recognized on the amendment.
You have, yes, the amendment should have been passed out. Madam Clerk, would you make sure? The drafting code is 3103. Or is it 31540?
Representative Pitts, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of order. When we have amendments that rewrite the bill or make the bill or substantially change the bill, I realize you're trying to move with all due haste, but are we going to be allowed a few days or maybe a deferral until the next? And I'm not trying to slow things down or impede progress, no. But this is a pretty important issue, clearly by the crowd we have here. So will you be rolling this committee roll till next week? Give us time to read it, hear the presentation, and then vote on it next week.
The intent today is to begin the discussion. If the committee wants to move the bill as is, we could do that, because we officially have to put all the amendments on in full committee. You know, that's something it has to happen there. So what we're trying to do, even in the subcommittee, is to get plenty of notice, 24 hours or better, in reference to any amendment from that standpoint. And we're trying to develop it to where it's in the system as well as a piece of paper. So that's the intent. I don't know when we distributed the amendment on this one.
You come out this morning? Yeah. think it came out last night, but it wasn't distributed this morning.
So we've had a few hours to look at it.
Yes, sir, since the morning.
Okay. What, to the
But point's well taken. That is where we're heading, and what we will pretty well tighten up on in full committee, that if we've got an amendment there, that's substantially, it's not just a technical issue, then we will roll the bill before we vote on that particular issue for a week.
And you'll commit to holding it in committee until we've had a thorough discussion about it?
Yes, sir. That is correct. We will. If there's an amendment that doesn't have sufficient notice, then we will hold it there until there's time to look at that and study the amendment from that standpoint. But in the subcommittee, we have the authority and the right that we've done for years in subcommittees, is to many times just move the bill on out based on what we know, knowing there's going to be some additional amendments.
Okay.
So that's an option that the committee has. The committee can opt to do that if that's a choice.
Fair enough.
Is that
Thank you,
reasonable
Mr. Chairman.
explanation?
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from membership? Representative Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. And if I may add to Representative Pitt's question, this is actually, and after I explain this, this is a discussion ongoing. This bill has brought to me by Speaker Harwell, and but we are listening to all parties. And if I may say this is an ongoing discussion, and what I would like to do today is go ahead and move this bill into full committee. We're going to, if we amend it, we can have future discussion, but this is an ongoing discussion. We're not trying to do anything to say got you with anybody, but what we're trying to do is improve the system. And so if I can explain what we're trying to do to the rest of the committee, and then have a discussion that would address what you're saying. As I started out to say earlier, is my goal with this piece of legislation is to give every child in the state an opportunity to get the best education that he or she is capable of, and to give every parent the opportunity to make the school choices that are best for their child's future. That is the #1 goal of what we're trying to do. Let me just say, and I'll go into more detail in a second, what the main discussion. This does have the title on it, State Authorization Bill of Charter Schools. However, it's not quite that's not really the full name. What we're trying to do, right now in the current law in charter schools, we allow two entities to be chartering authorities. That's the LEA, the Local Educational Association, or now we have the ASDs, or the Achievement School Districts under Superintendent Chris Barber. They are the two that can take charter school applications. What the discussion is now, should we have a third one? And the third one being the State Board of Education. That's the entire gist of this bill. Everything else is down in the details. So my earlier comment was no one group has all the answers. Maybe this is something we should look at. Now, some people want us to have an entire statewide authorizer bill that covers every district in the state. This particular bill now that we have designed today is limited to the two largest school districts or school systems in the state, and that is the systems in Nashville and in Memphis, because these are the two with the most charter schools. These are the two with the most schools and the lowest 5% of performance, and also the two with the highest number of charter school applications per year. And so that's why these have been singled out. School systems cannot turn around overnight, and while our school systems wrestle with change, some of it mandated, some implemented willingly with the best intentions, parents are becoming impatient because they fear the changes will come too late for their child. I remember the first day we opened up committee, and when I started my career as a teacher out back in the 70s, I had a poster on my wall, and it went something like, "A child is a gift that soon disappears into an adult." And before they keep disappearing into adults, we got to figure out as adults how to get it right. Now, this bill isn't perfect, but it is an honest attempt to meet the needs of our parents and students. And here's basically what the bill does. It applies to local educational associations in counties with more than 600,000 population and that have at least one charter application that has been denied by the LEA that was ultimately approved by the SBE, or the State Board of Education, on appeal. This includes Memphis and Nashville. A charter school applicant in these LEAs may choose to apply either to the LEA or to the State Board of Education. This is where the difference comes in that is mentioned. If the charter school applicant chooses the State Board as an authorizer, the board's decision to approve or deny the application is final and not subject to appeal. This also is the case for renewal applications and revocation of charter agreements. Number 3, all funding for the schools authorized by the board remains the same, but is collected and dispersed by the Department of Education directly to the charter school, and currently is now going through the LEA. And the performance of the charter schools authorized by the state board is not attributable to the local LEA. The state board will take responsibility for the performance. And lastly, the state board may call upon the department to assist it with general oversight of the school, including assisting with oversight of compliance with state law and adherence to the charter agreement, such as transportation or lunchroom facilities. That is the general gist of the bill. And the reason that I agreed to carry this is because the comment that I made originally, no one group has all the answers. As long as we leave all the decision making to one group, then possibly we stagnate. And year after year after year, we're having children that are not graduating school with the requirements that they need. And so with that in mind, Mr. Chairman, I would like to move that we pass this out to full committee.
We're on the amendment and the discussion of the amendment. Any discussion about the amendment? Representative Pitts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman White, did Shelby County and Metro Nashville bring this bill to you to ask you just to make it apply to them?
No. This was brought.
How did you arrive at? I know you said the speaker brought this bill to you to carry, but trying to figure out why we wouldn't make this policy apply statewide, because Chattanooga has charter schools and other communities may in the future.
Our Nashville prep is leaving, and I'd like to thank you all for being here today, and keep up good work. Y'all come back and see us anytime. We appreciate this. This discussion is about you, all about you. Representative Pitts. You want to reckon?
Personal privilege.
I'm sorry.
Chairman DeBerry.
Thank you for personal privilege. Before the Nashville prep kids leave, our 2 guides who guided us a couple of weeks ago, would you guys come up to the microphone real quick, if I may, Mr. Chairman?
We'll go out of session.
Just for them to say.
Go out of session for a couple of minutes.
I want you to tell Mr. Chairman, these were fantastic children.
If these 2 young folks could introduce themselves with their names. Sure, pull the mic down a little bit, would you?
Is a little button?
Here. Hello? Okay. Hi, I'm Nevaeh Harris.
My name is Elias Sukes.
And they did a real good job, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We're back in session, and I think Representative Pitts had the mic.
And Chairman White had the question.
Okay. Yes, the best explanation I can give you as we're starting at this point is these 2 communities, Memphis, of which I represent as a representative, and Nashville are the ones, so far, that's where the activity in charter schools is going on. It hasn't really, Chattanooga is some, Knoxville is some, but most of the activity and applications are happening in these two towns, and so I thought it best just to start the discussion here.
But Chattanooga has charter schools, 4 charter schools. I mean, where's the threshold? I mean, do you have to have a minimum in order to qualify for this bill?
No, the threshold right now is any city with a population of 600,000 or more.
I guess I'm just not understanding why public policy should just apply to those 2 communities. If it's good enough for those 2, why wouldn't you make it statewide? And I mean,
yeah, that's the comment. Why not? Some people want it statewide. Some people don't want it at all.
Well, would you entertain an amendment to make it statewide?
I would certainly entertain talking with the sponsor of the bill and and see if that's something.
I'm not trying to complicate things. I'm just trying to figure out why these two communities, because if Chattanooga's got charter schools and other communities ultimately will have them, then that locks them out of whatever provision this may be.
Right.
But you've answered that question. Can you walk me through the process again slowly? Because you've got a state board of education who could ultimately approve an application.
Correct.
Then what happens? Does that become a state charter school, public charter school?
Right, and if there's any detail that I get mired down in, I'll be glad to ask the question of the state board and/or a specific person. But the way I understand we're drafting this legislation is that if the charter applicant applies directly to the state, which this legislation will give them the right to do, then they bypass the local LEA. Once they do that, then it comes to the state, and the state can make the state board can make that decision. Now, the dangerous thing about that, if you want to put a caveat in there, is the state board's decision is final. Now, right now, if they go through the LEA and they are turned down, they can appeal to the state. But if you go straight to the state board, then you have your act together then, or you may be turned down, and there is no appeal.
So any progress or academic or lack of made at that charter school, does that count against the LEA if it's a state-approved charter school?
If it's a state-approved charter school, as I mentioned in my last comment, without looking into the detail of the bill, the performance of the charter schools authorized by the state board is not attributable to the LEA as far as the performance.
And the funding would be much like the charter schools are funded now?
Correct. The funding is the same. However, the funding would go directly to the charter school from the state board and not through the LEA.
So the state board would authorize it, then they'd own it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, not to belabor the point at whatever the appropriate time, I'd like to hear from Dr. Nixon of the State School Board, as well as maybe some parents about this, because I'm still kind of troubled by it just applying to two communities in our state.
Is there a question you want to ask Dr. Nixon?
I'd like to know how he feels about this. I mean, clearly, ultimately, it's going to fall on him and the State School Board.
Any member that asks someone to comment, that will be honored.
Okay.
From that standpoint.
Could we hear from him?
Dr. Nixon, you've been asked to opine in reference to this concept. If you'll introduce yourself and your position before you begin making comments.
My name is Gary Nixon. I'm Executive Director of the State Board of Education. The State Board will certainly work at the pleasure of this body, and if you approve this, we will do everything we can to implement the law. The issue we would have, and I think it's addressed in the bill because the Department of Education has stepped up to say we will provide the resources, staff to implement the review process, make the recommendations to the board, and then we'll oversee the schools as they are implemented, and then we'll judge them from an accountability standpoint. The State Board basically in this process is the approving agency, and the Department of Education will be the agency that will do most of the implementation. I think Stephen Smith may want to answer the question about funding, but it's my understanding that the funding would flow through the Department of Education. They have a vehicle to do that. The State Board does not.
So is it the State Board that will provide oversight to the
Department of Education?
The Department of Education will provide oversight.
That's correct.
So if there's 200 charter schools approved through this method, State Department of Education will oversee 200 charter schools.
I think that's the commitment.
Okay. You feel pretty good about that?
I don't.
Oh, you don't feel good about that?
I don't feel good about 200. I think 200 would be a different ball game. But in terms of getting started, and who knows? Well, I don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball to know what the future is going to hold, but in terms of the numbers we've seen in the past, it's manageable. But if the numbers escalate, we'll have to come back here and have to seek additional resources.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nixon. I don't have any other questions of him, but I would, again, Mr. Chairman, like to hear from some parents.
Just a minute. Are there other members that have a question for Dr. Nixon while we're out of session? Seeing none. Thank you, Dr. Nixon. And your next request, Representative Pitts, is you would like to hear a particular
Yeah,
parent.
there's some from parents groups
You can
out there.
identify the parent. We'll be happy to give them a chance to an opportunity to make a brief comment.
Okay, we have Amy Frog, who with the Metro Nashville School Board, also a parent. If we could,
Okay,
I could
that'd be fine. I think you and I talked about a 2 to 3 minute.
Exactly.
Okay, so you have 2 to 3 minutes to make a comment.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Amy Frog, and I am the parent of two, is this too loud, of two public school children here in Nashville. I'm also the District 9 representative for the Nashville School Board. I was elected in August. I ran against the highest funded candidate in school board history. I was outfunded 5-1, and I won by a 2-1 margin. And I say that not as bragging rights, but to tell you that I represent a strong, silent majority here in Nashville that is vehemently opposed to bills like this. And I know right now you guys have been hearing from a lot of people who've paid a lot of money to be involved in this discussion here in Tennessee. And I implore you to hear parents and those of us who will be directly impacted by this bill. What I want to say today is here in Davidson County, we have an excellent track record with our charter schools. We are outperforming the national average. The national average is pretty low. It's only 17% of charter schools outperform our traditional schools. We are far above that average. We are outperforming the national average on approving charter schools. I think that we have shown that we are open to innovation. I think that we have shown that we are very good at managing our charter schools. And we have a good relationship with the charter schools that we have. This bill would undermine that relationship. It would create a shotgun marriage, and we would not be able to have the collaboration that we've had so far. The real reason we're talking about this bill today is that it is a reaction to a disagreement that our district had with the State Board of Education over one particular charter school, over the quality of that school. And our board, in good faith, determined that the requirements that were set by the state for that school had not been met. That resulted in a $3.4 million fine. So it's kind of unfortunate, I think, that we are sort of being singled out here in Davidson County. The other point I want to make is that the only grossly underperforming school we have, the only grossly underperforming charter school here in Davidson County, was opened under the direction of the State Board of Education. We were forced to open it. And then finally, a couple more points. I think this would place an undue financial burden on our city. Right now, we pay 2/3 the cost of our charters. The state pays 1/3. The charters here are not full. They're not at capacity. We're paying for them, and we're paying for other schools. We would be paying a lot more if we had a large amount of charter schools. And I would just ask you to consider rolling this bill until you can really hear from other people who have a strong interest in this. I know Dr. Register, who's our director of schools, is interested in speaking, and he really needs to have opportunity. And because this bill came up at 4:00 p.m. yesterday, we've got a lot of parents here supporting us. That's pretty amazing since it's 3 o'clock. It's pickup time for kids at school. I really hope that you will be willing to listen to other people that have an interest in this bill. Thank you.
Representative Pitts.
I just have one other parent, if I may, call them, and I appreciate the indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I really do.
A couple of minutes is fine.
Okay, Ms. Smith or Ms. Baldwin?
Wait, let me first, before the lady leaves the mic, she already left. Are there questions of other members of the lady that's on the school board here in Davidson County? Seeing none. Representative Pitts, you want to recognize the second person for a short, brief comment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Smith or Ms. Baldwin, one or the two, they can flip a coin and draw straws.
If you'll identify yourself,
Sure.
for the record, that would, that's what we need to do to begin.
Yes, sir. My name is Shelley Baldwin. I live here in Nashville. I have two children in an elementary school here in town. I'm greatly concerned about this. As Amy said, our district has an amazing track record for charter schools. We personally welcome charter schools with open arms that are quality, that will serve the students that need the help in our district. The governor stated that we have an immoral achievement gap, which I think everybody agrees on. And unfortunately, a lot of the charter schools nationally don't necessarily serve the kids that are in the bottom of those achievement gaps, the disabled, the ELL kids, to a very significant level. Nashville actually does a fairly good job of that. We average about the same for disability, 12%. Our ELL in the charters is a little bit low. but it could be helped. So if you are talking about setting up an entity that takes away the control of our local board to continue that track record of excellence, we're concerned. We have no ability or recourse for an entity of an appointed board of people to say, hey, you're not giving us the charters that our district needs. We need charters to serve these students, and you're giving us Great Hearts, who in Arizona serve 0% ELL in 6 of their 12 schools. So please consider that. If you're going to take away the voice of our elected officials, I would like you to consider that as an elected official, how you would feel if somebody took away your voice for us.
Representative Pitts, you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you for your indulgence.
Membership, do you have a question of the speaker? Seeing none, we're going to go back into session. And I think next on the list is, are you finished with Representative Pitts? Are you finished? Representative Love, you're recognized.
As I'm reading this amendment, I'm seeing that the state board would withhold funds from the per student amount and the federal funding and distribute that to the charter school, correct? If it's appeals to the state for approval, correct?
Right. The difference will be that the funding will go directly from the state to the charter school and not go through the LEA.
My concern is this last part where it says the LEA will be paying the state board approved charter out of its local match funds. Is that down in section E, I think, for the non-classroom component?
Same amount of money, right. Also, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Throckmorton has a comment too. I'd like to, okay, to answer that.
Representative Love, you have the mic, and then we'll
Is that the same amount?
Request.
I'm sorry, I was talking and I didn't hear your question.
Where it says the LEA shall pay to the department the required local match under the BEP for capital outlay as a non-classroom component for distribution to the local charter. So is that money that is generated locally and then sent to the charter?
The same funding that goes on now.
Okay.
Everything.
But this will still be for a charter that went to the state for approval.
That is correct.
Okay. So the charter will be funded by the state and the local agency.
The same way charters are fully public schools, yes. So the funding.
I mean, under this new amendment, though, even the ones that maybe I'm not asking the question right. The charter that goes straight to the state board, that's going to get funded through the department now. Yeah, because the LEA is being required to give us some more money. Is that right?
No. Could we get clarity on that? The way I understand the bill, the funding is not changed. We get clarity on that. The funding stays like it is now, but it just goes through the department to disperse and not the LEA to disperse. If I'm in error on that, I would like to have clarity from the
And the only reason I'm asking because it listed in 2 different locations.
Stephen.
Because it's listed in D and E. That's the only reason I'm asking because it has, if it's the same way it is now, then why separate it out in section D and in section E?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, could we go out of session and have Mr. Smith address that?
No objection. We're going to session. Mr. Smith, Stephen Smith, identify yourself and your title, please. And the question is best you understand. If you'll help us respond to that, please.
Yes, sir. Stephen Smith, Department of Education. Representative Love, the funding works. They're going to get the same amount of funding that any public charter school gets today. It's just the mechanism by which the charter school receives the funding. So everything that you're looking in, everything that you see in the language of this bill in terms of the capital outlay portion and then the other portion, the local portion, essentially that's going to be coming directly from the state.
I guess my question is this. It says the LEA shall pay to the department, but in section D it says that the state shall withhold any per pupil or federal funding, as if the state is not going to send to the LEA what it normally would send to give to the charter, but then additionally in E it's going to require the LEA to give money. That doesn't sound like the same thing to me. I mean, help me out, though.
Yeah, sure. The reason that's in 2 separate sections is that currently for all public charter schools, the way the funding works for capital outlay is separated from the rest of the funding for charter schools. So it's in two different sections, and so this essentially mirrors that.
So even though this particular charter would go to the state board for approval instead of the LEA is still required to put up some money for it.
That's correct. Just as in now, if the state board overturns the local board's decision.
You sure you heard what I asked?
Then yes.
That if this charter school applies to the state instead of the LEA, the LEA is still required to put up some money for it.
Correct. Just as they are now when the LEA does not approve the charter school.
Okay. So the LEA will be paying for this charter school also?
It works exactly the same way it works today. State and local funds.
Gotcha.
Per pupil.
Are there other questions of Mr. Smith from the other members? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Smith. We're back in session. And next on my list is Chairman Fogarty.
Thank you, Chairman Brooks, Chairman White. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to commend everybody, Chairman White, for looking to improve the educational experience of children in the state of Tennessee. That's what we're all about. I will say that, in my opinion, this bill would indeed circumvent the legally vested authority of local boards of education that are elected by the people of their district, and it would relegate that authority from the local board to an appointed body who, incidentally, by the way, Dr. Nixon and the state board are wonderful people, and they do a great job. But they are indeed an appointed body that are a policy-making body, and it would indeed put a policy-making body in the business of making day-to-day decisions in running a school or a school system. To me, to remove the authority, whether we agree with the local board or whether we disagree with the local board, to remove the authority that's been vested in them by the state of Tennessee in a legal election and take that authority and put it in the hands of an appointed body, to me, is fundamentally wrong. Whether you agree or not, that is fundamentally wrong. In regard to Metro Davidson and their issues, I looked briefly into the record of the Metro Davidson Board of Education. They have approximately a 39+% rate of approval of charter schools. And that's essentially higher than the national average, which is about 33%. So, you know, and those are rough estimates. In 11 years, ladies and gentlemen, there have been 42 appeals to the State Board of Education. Of those 42 appeals, 7 were overturned. Compliments to the State Board. Of those 7, only 4 actually opened. I fear, and with all due respect to my colleague, Chairman White, and all those folk, my friend, Mr. Throckmorton, if we're not careful, we have a solution looking for a problem. And I feel like that authority of the local Board of Education is something that is a very slippery slope. If we start meddling in that and making individual decisions, after all, if we do indeed believe that the best government is that government closest to the people, then, in my opinion, we need to leave those decisions primarily with local boards of education or with locally elected officials. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman White, your There's no one else on the list to speak, so I'm going to turn it back to you for any final comments.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate so much everyone's comments. And as I mentioned when I started the discussion out, this is still an ongoing discussion because we're wanting to do the right thing. In respect for my colleague, Chairman Fogarty, he has quite a history and reputation as a fine superintendent, and I respect his opinion and always lists. I guess my question to the committee is, at what point are we going to start moving the needle? I have lived in Tennessee since 1966, and we have remained in the bottom 5 to 10% of the percentile in the state. When are we going to start moving the needle? And the state is doing everything it can right now to try to advance education reform in the state. And sometimes, just like when you have another company that comes along and says, hey, we're going to start sending out clean chairs, when are you going to do the same? That's all we're asking is the state, through this legislation, is asking that it have the opportunity to start moving education reform. Now, if the LEAs, who I also have a great respect for because they're hardworking people voted by the citizens of the communities, whenever they do their best job and seeing that things are happening, then that will only pull their game up too. Competition just brings everybody up. A rising tide lifts all boats. So I understand the comments. I think that what we're doing is no harm. I think it will help interject competition to our system. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to renew my motion that we go ahead and pass House Bill 702 out to full committee.
Representative Pitts would like to make a closing comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll get with you, Chairman White, about offering an amendment in committee to make this statewide, because I still am troubled by the restricting it to 2. But, Mr. Chairman, could we have a roll call on the amendment in the bill, please?
We sure can. Is there any objection to calling the question? Seeing none, we're voting on the amendment. This is the amendment to House Bill 0702. Madam Clerk, call the roll. If you vote yes, you're voting for the amendment. If you vote no, you're voting against the amendment.
Brooks?
Here, yes.
DeBerry? Fogarty?
No.
Kane? Love? No. Moody? Yes. Pitts? No. Rutherford of White? Yes. White of Rutherford? White of Shelby?
Yes.
What's the result, Madam Clerk?
6-3, and aye.
Okay, the amendment has been approved. Seeing no other amendments to come before the committee, we're on the bill as amended. All those in favor of the bill say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'm sorry. Do you ask for a roll call on both items or just the amendment?
Both the amendment and the bill.
I thought you just said the amendment. I apologize.
I stand corrected if you misheard me. Sorry.
Okay. We're now on the bill as amended. Roll call has been requested. Call the roll, Madam Clerk.
Brooks?
Aye.
DeBerry? Fogarty? No. Kane? Aye. Love? No. Moody? Aye. Pitts? No. White of Rutherford? White of Shelby?
Aye.
6 ayes, 3 noes.
The bill moves out to full committee. Mr. Chairman, you have the mic. You're now